Hey ART2, so we are going to learn a few watercolor techniques, and a lot of this will be review from ART1. However, we are adding 3 new watercolor techniques to this today. So what you will need is salt, even if it's salt packets, bleach water, a masking fluid, which rubber cement with acetone or just rubber cement is good. You can get this at a dollar store and mix it with nail polish remover to make it thin, just a very little bit. Or you can come and get some from the office if you tell me to do so. Other things are plastic wrap, and I think that's about it as far as some techniques go. And don't forget your paper towel and water for a safety reason, since we are working with water. So one thing you're going to do is I have a cup of water and I have some salt, and I'm going to go ahead and dump this salt into my water. And then with the handle of my brush, I can mix this together until it's well blended. And I'm going to just go ahead and set this off to the side. I just want to make a pretty good salt water. So if you don't have these little packets, it's probably about 3 pinches worth, or just kind of a dash into your hand is good too. Just some salt. As long as you have salt, you're good. Set that off to the side. And I'm going to go ahead and get my masking fluid, which I mixed rubber cement with some acetone or nail polish remover. I'm going to use a brush that I am okay with if it gets ruined. So this is one that has had it used, and it does not really wash out very well. Rubber cement is fumy, so it has a smell to it. So when you use it, you want to open, and then when you're done, go ahead and cover it so that the fumes don't get to you or give you a headache. This is about the consistency of when you get mail and you get that gummy stuff in your pages in your mail on magazines. This is a lot like what that would be. So this is going to need to dry. So I am going to go ahead and apply some of this to my paper, and it is thick, so it is really hard to get really fine lines with it. I am using a bit of a bigger brush, and I want a pretty good coat of this on here. Once again, if you're using rubber cement, this is fine too. I just like to make mine thinner with some nail polish remover so that it moves easier, because it is pretty gloppy and gooey. Maybe some stripes in here. So this is going to act as a resist, so that when it dries, I can paint over it and all these areas will be white. So this technique of 1 of 13, so I've sectioned off about 13 spaces, is called masking fluid. You can buy masking fluid for painting, however, it's cheaper just to make it if you have it, I think, and it will take a few minutes for that to dry. The next one we are going to do is called, we're going to do salt resist. And I'm actually going to go ahead and do a flat wash at the same time here, because you need a flat wash for the salt resist. So for a flat wash with your clean water, don't get your water mixed up with your salt and your bleach water. Make sure you have clean water. I'm going to cover the paper first with water, because wherever there is water, the paint will go. And I'm going to go ahead and get my paints here. I'm using Prang watercolor paints. Crayola is okay, however, those kinds of paints are pretty light. So you'll see once I add the paint kind of spreads on its own, because it's wet and it's like a river. If I touch it with water, water becomes one and it just flows on its own. Okay, and then we are going to let that one dry and come back to it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do another flat wash over here of the same color. You'll notice that I painted 2 spaces that are wet next to each other, and they bled together. It did not stay a divide. The key tip is you do not paint two wet spaces side by side. However, since these are both the same color, it does not matter. But rule of thumb, let this dry, then come back to the space next to it to paint it again. So I'm gonna make sure this is nice and wet and have your salt handy. And I want it to be kind of dark, so it kind of needs to be a bit darker blue so I can see this salt do its magic. Then I'm going to take a good pinch of salt and go ahead and sprinkle it on top, and you'll see that the salt will start to soak up that paint. Okay, and then we'll let that one dry, and then when it's dry you can rub off the salt. The salt does not stay, you have to rub the salt off. Okay. Next one is going to be wax resist. And with a white pastel or white crayon, just make some marks in here, nice and dark and solid. The more wax you add, the more likely that this will work, because wax and water do not like each other. I'm gonna get some paint and paint over top of it, and it will not go where my wax is at. All right. Okay, I'm gonna skip one so that I don't have these bleed together. Next one is going to be my graduated wash. And with a graduated wash, it is a lot like a value scale. So with a wet brush and some paint on it, I'm going to paint a thin line of where I want my dark value to be. And I'm going to rinse my brush. And with water, I'm going to pull that down so that it thins out and gets lighter as I go away from that line. So it gradually shows value, and I can always add a bit more paint up here if I want it to be more than what it is. Say it goes too far, grab some paper towel and pull it off if it is doing too much that you want. So I'm going to dab some off and then blend it out again. Okay, so paper towel is your friend. Definitely a friend for mistakes. All right, then we have free flow. So we need a wet space with water. And free flow is a lot like tie-dye, so I'm going to put multiple colors in here. I'm just going to drop them in and let them blend together. You kind of can guide it around. And it should kind of blur your paints. Okay, next is plastic. I don't have a fancy name for it, it's just plastic. So with saran wrap or any kind of plastic that you have, even like a grocery bag would be fine. Going to take some paint, cover this nice and wet. And I'm going to place my plastic on top, but I'm not going to mess with it too much. So you can kind of see all these lines that happen. So when we go into painting our crystals and gems and you see shards or breakage or like just lines throughout those crystals, this would be a really great technique to show all of the iciness to a crystal. Okay, so we're going to let that dry for a little bit until it is done. But if I push too much on it, it's just going to squish everything out and I won't get any texture. So don't fuss with it too much. Okay, the next one is called stippling. And it is just dots. It's a lot like splattering. However, the technical term or artistic term for it is stippling when you have lots of dots. So you're gonna hold your finger and tap very close to the paper. And just by tapping, it helps control where your dots go. The closer you are and more controlled your finger is steady, you won't get it all over the place. However, it still might go places you don't want. So it is a bit more random than a lot of things. I can also add some other colors in here. Okay, so that's stippling. Then my flat wash is kind of dry over here. So I'm going to return to that. And I'm going to actually add dry brush to it. And dry brush, you obviously need a dry brush. So you're going to make sure your brush is clean, dry it off with paper towel, spread the hairs apart on your brush, dip only the tips into the paint, and then just feather it across, and it will create a bit of a texture, like hair roughness. Okay, so that's dry brush on top of a flat wash. Okay, then we have blotting. So I'm going to go ahead and do some paint in here. Blend it or spread it with water. Don't always have to go back for paint. You can just use water to spread it because obviously it's watercolor. It needs water. Okay, so we already know that blotting can be used for mistakes by using paper towels. However, blotting is also good for just removing paint in general. Say we just want a bit of a lighter value of this color. You can pull it off with your paper towel. All right, next one we are going to do here is wet to wet blend. And with a wet to wet blend, you're going to pick colors that mix well together. So I'm going to start with a red because I know red or sunset colors, those definitely blend well together. And I'm going to paint half of this space. Then I'm going to pick another color such as, let's go with blue, because I know blue and red make purple. And I'm going to bring that color halfway up until it meets in the middle and the two blend together like a 4th of July popsicle. And I even take some water and swirl it around a little bit. And then that's a wet to wet blend. And that one actually makes a new color. All right, one thing I want you to notice is that you have a graduated wash over here that has possibly dried. There are obvious puddle marks. When you have a lot of water on your paper and it dries, it creates all of these water marks that are not very clean and well painted with. To get rid of those, you just take a wet brush and you gently kind of rub the paper and blend those out so that those puddle marks can go away and it's a more smooth looking painting. And I don't have any more puddles. Okay, so we did dry brush, we just did a wet to wet blend, then we have thin line. So with a thin line, you're going to take a relatively dry to wet, so not too dry or not too wet, and you're going to pull the tip tight into a point. Pick a color and you will just kind of draw with it. So this is really good for fine details. Anything you need to do small, this technique has a name and it is thin line. Okay, our masking fluid is almost dry over here, so I got 2 more things to do. And that involves my salt water and my bleach water. So with just plain bleach, I mix it with a little bit of water. And I'm going to take that bleach water and I'm going to cover an entire space or a section of my paper with it. So this is not like a cleaner or anything like that. It's just pure bleach, not like a toilet bowl cleaner. You don't want anything gel. This is very much liquid, so it's not gel. Then I'm going to clean my brush, go into my paints, and drop the paint in there. And you will notice that the bleach will let the paint spread only so far, and it creates a little bit of a hazed ring around it, and it also kind of changed the color of my purple. So if we kind of look at this purple versus that one, the bleach kind of alters it and breaks it down. So the bleach has a different effect than free flow does. Free flow and bleach water, huge difference between the two. Don't really see my drops. These ones kind of have a ring around it. All right, so that was bleach water. Now we have salt water. Okay, I'm going to take my salt water, spread that around on the page. Pick a color, clean the brush off first. I'm gonna stick with purple since it's easy to see. This one has legs. You will notice, if you zoom real close, that when I drop this, it almost like crackles and turns into like these tree roots. Just so fun just to drop it in there and see what it does. And it's super dark as well. So huge difference between that to bleach water to free flow, okay? Big difference, and I love it. Love, love, love it. All right, my masking fluid is now dry. I am then going to go ahead and paint over top of this, and you'll kind of notice that that masking fluid is resisting the paint, and this is very promising. So we have done where we tape the paper, we tape the paper just to keep areas white. We do wax resist to keep areas white. We do a lot of things. However, this one for sure will keep the paper white without tearing paper, without worrying that the wax isn't enough, and so forth. So I'm going to kind of fling this and let this dry. And when it is dry, kind of just dab this off a little bit. So don't do this, I'm just kind of quickly showing you. I can then take my finger and rub, kind of it's kind of like glue, which it is in a way. Rub this off, and it's a very gummy texture. So only do this when it's dry completely, and it will keep your paper white. It might have some green haze or color haze behind it because it didn't completely cover it, meaning that your thickness or layer wasn't all the way there. So it may not have enough on the paper if it went through. Great. So that is the 13 watercolor techniques you might use for your stone, crystal, gem, mineral, whatever you choose. These can become very handy. When you get to finding your picture of your crystal, mineral, and whatever it is. So here are some examples of mine. I just found a couple of paragraphs that help me remember what these all mean. Some that I found really interesting. I'm going to practice this on a scrap watercolor paper before I go. So I definitely want to make a scientific illustration of all of my crystals and gems. I have a lot more to choose just because I think it's more interesting to look at when you have a lot on your paper. It becomes more like a poster you can frame. and I really like that idea. However, you can just choose one. There are lots of artists that do things like this, where it's a complex crystal or gem, such as your birthstones. So look at the Google Slides for examples, look at the artist's work, and watch the tutorial videos to help you learn how to paint these. And email me if you have questions. Adios.